The city skyline glowed with the morning sun, its reflection bouncing off the towering glass mansion that loomed above the hills like a monument to wealth and loneliness. Damian Holt sat at the head of a long mahogany dining table, a steaming cup of black coffee untouched in front of him, his piercing grey eyes staring at nothing in particular, his jaw set in the kind of expression that kept most people at arm's length. At 32, Damian was the man every business magazine admired and every woman in his circle envied. Heir to the Holt fortune, he had inherited not just billions, but also the crushing mantle of leadership. When his father died suddenly 5 years ago, the world saw him as powerful, untouchable, coldly efficient. But behind closed doors, Damian Holt was a man living a hollow existence. The playboy he had been at 20 was long gone. Now, despite his success, he felt a gnawing emptiness. No party, no woman, no thrill could ignite anything inside him anymore. He had tried expensive models, glamorous socialites, women of influence, but none stirred his heart or body. His desire had withered, and with it, his hope of ever finding more to life than work and wealth. "Sir," his assistant Mark broke into his thoughts, "I've replaced the cook you dismissed yesterday. The new one starts this morning, a Miss Elena Morris." Damian didn't even look up. "If she's like the last, she won't last a week." Mark hesitated. "She comes highly recommended, but if I may, she's different." Damian gave him a cold glance. "They all seem different, Mark, until they annoy me." Still, when the faint sound of soft humming drifted in from the kitchen a few minutes later, Damian's brows furrowed. Nobody had hummed in his house in years. He ignored it, dismissing the sound as unimportant, and returned to his tablet. Elena Morris stood in the kitchen, tying her apron a little tighter as she surveyed the grand counters and endless rows of gleaming appliances. At 27, she had seen enough hardships to last a lifetime, but she carried herself with quiet determination. Her black, radiant skin glowed under the morning light, streaming in through the wide windows, and her long dark brown curls framed her face in soft waves. She remembered what the staff had whispered when she first arrived: "Don't try to talk to him. Don't look him in the eye unless he speaks to you. If you want to last here, pretend he doesn't exist. He's impossible." Cold as ice. Elena had smiled politely, brushing it off. "I'm not here to be noticed. I'm here to work. I need the money, and that's all." Her mother's medical bills weighed heavily on her shoulders, and so did the student loans she was desperate to pay off. This job, no matter how difficult, paid well. That was enough. She chopped vegetables with practiced precision, her hands moving gracefully as the aroma of garlic and herbs began to fill the space. Cooking was her escape, her way of putting love into something tangible. When Damian entered the kitchen unannounced, Elena kept her focus on her work. She felt his presence before she saw him. His aura was sharp, commanding, heavy. "Who taught you to use fresh herbs?" Damian's voice was low, questioning but not unkind. Elena turned briefly, her expression calm. "My mother, sir. She believed food should be alive before it reaches the plate." There was no flattery in her tone, no attempt to please, just a simple truth. Damian studied her for a moment longer than he intended. Most women in his world would have seized that chance to charm him. But this one, she turned back to her chopping as though he were just another man passing through. Over the next week, Damian began to notice Elena's quiet presence more than he expected. She never initiated conversation, never sought his attention. She simply did her work, efficiently, gracefully, with no complaints. It unsettled him. So he tested her. He demanded meals at impossible hours, ordered changes to menus after she had already prepared them, and left barely touched plates, as if to say her efforts weren't good enough. Behind the closed kitchen door, Elena's tears often fell. But when she stepped out to serve him, her posture was straight, her eyes dry, her voice steady. "I have prepared what you asked for, sir." Mark noticed her resilience and pulled her aside one day. "You don't have to take his moods personally, Elena. He's always been like this." She smiled faintly, though her chest ached. "I'm not here for his moods. I'm here to work, get paid, and go home." Still, late at night, she let the weight of it crush her. Alone in the pantry one evening, she pressed her hands against her face, muffling her sobs. "Why does he make this so hard? I need this job. I can't lose it." She didn't know that Damian was passing by at that exact moment. Damian stopped at the sight of her, framed by the doorway, her shoulders shaking. For a man who prided himself on being untouchable, something pierced him then, a sharp ache he couldn't explain. When Elena noticed him, she straightened immediately, wiping her face, forcing a smile. "Your meals for today and tomorrow are prepared." "Sir," she said softly, her voice polite and steady. "Everything is in order." Then she walked past him, her head high, leaving him rooted in place. For the first time in years, Damian Holt felt unsettled, not by anger, not by boredom, but by something dangerously close to compassion, and perhaps, though he dared not name it, something more. That night, as he sat alone in his study with the untouched glass of whiskey in his hand, her image returned to him over and over, the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she had hidden her pain and yet carried on. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The next morning, Elena didn't appear at breakfast. For the first time since she'd been hired, the house felt oppressively empty. The food prepared by another maid tasted bland, lifeless. Damian set down his fork, restless, his chest tightening at the thought that she might have left. "Where is Elena?" he demanded. Mark hesitated. "She took the morning off. She said she needed time." Damian pushed back from the table abruptly. He had meetings lined up, contracts worth millions awaiting his signature. But none of it mattered. For reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself grabbing his car keys and heading out. The sleek black car cut through the city streets until he reached the modest neighborhood Mark had quietly given him directions to. Children played in the yards, women chatted on porches, and the air smelled faintly of fried food and detergent. It was a world far removed from his mansion of glass and steel. Elena's home was small but tidy, with flower pots hanging by the window. When she opened the door, surprise flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Holt," she said, her voice low. Damian cleared his throat, suddenly feeling out of place. "I came to speak with you. About yesterday." She tilted her head, wary but polite. "Please come in." Inside, the furniture was worn but cared for. A photo of an older woman in a hospital gown rested on the mantel, surrounded by bills stacked neatly in a corner. Damian noticed everything. Elena offered him a seat and, without ceremony, poured him a glass of water. "I assume you didn't drive here for food, sir." Damian exhaled slowly. "I owe you an apology. I've made your work more difficult than it needed to be." "That wasn't fair." Her brows lifted slightly. She hadn't expected him to say that. "I don't need apologies," she said gently. "I just need the job, that's all." But as he watched her move around the room, fussing over her younger brother's homework, speaking to him with laughter in her voice, Damian felt something he hadn't felt in years. A stirring, a rush of blood, a pull he couldn't name. It scared him. That night he left her home unsettled, the ghost of her smile haunting him long after he drove away. The city buzzed beneath Damian Holt's penthouse as night fell, but inside his mansion, silence pressed against the walls like a living thing. Damian sat in his leather chair, his laptop open on the desk, numbers and contracts glowing across the screen. He had work to do, he always had work to do, but tonight his concentration was shattered. Every time he tried to focus, the image of Elena in her modest home returned to him, the way she had greeted him without fawning, the way her laughter filled the room when she teased her little brother, the calm dignity with which she accepted his apology. It had all pierced through the thick shell he had built around himself. Damian raked a hand through his hair and let out a frustrated sigh. He wasn't supposed to feel this. For years his body had been numb, his heart unresponsive to any woman who crossed his path. He had accepted that as his reality, cold, detached, incapable of desire. Yet one visit to Elena's world had awoken something sharp and electric inside him, and it terrified him. The next morning, Elena returned to the mansion, dressed neatly in her uniform, her curls tied back, her face carrying its usual calm resolve. She moved into the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency, preparing breakfast as though nothing had happened. Damian, however, couldn't bring himself to step inside the room. He lingered in his study instead, sipping coffee that tasted empty, without the warmth of her presence. He told himself it was better this way. Better to keep distance than to let whatever this was spiral into something uncontrollable. At lunch, he had his assistant, Mark, deliver his food to him instead of sitting at the dining table. By dinner, he had left instructions for Elena to prepare the meal, but didn't appear to eat it. Elena noticed. She wasn't foolish. She could tell when someone was avoiding her. And Damian Holt, with his sharp grey eyes and commanding presence, was suddenly nowhere to be seen. That evening, as she scrubbed the counters, she felt a pang in her chest she hadn't expected. Why would it matter? She thought. He's just my employer. I don't need his attention. I don't even want it. But the hollow ache in her heart whispered otherwise. On the third day of his absence from the dining hall, Elena had enough. She prepared roasted chicken glazed with honey and herbs, her mother's recipe, the one she usually saved for special occasions. She set the table herself, arranging it with quiet care. When Damian still didn't appear, she squared her shoulders, lifted the serving tray, and carried it straight to his study. She knocked firmly. "Come in," his voice replied, clipped and impatient. Elena entered, her gaze steady as she set the tray down on his desk. The aroma filled the room, but Damian didn't look at her. His eyes remained glued to the laptop. "You haven't been eating," she said, her tone even but laced with quiet strength. Damian's fingers froze on the keyboard. Slowly he lifted his gaze, meeting hers for the first time in days. The force of his stare made her chest tighten, but she didn't waver. "You're not here to monitor my meals," he said flatly. "No," Elena admitted, folding her hands in front of her apron. "But I am here to do my job, and it's hard to do that when you're avoiding me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Damian's jaw clenched. "Avoiding you?" Her chin lifted slightly. "Yes, you come to my home, apologize, then spend days pretending I don't exist. If I've done something wrong, tell me. Otherwise, stop treating me like I'm a shadow." The raw honesty in her voice cut through him. No one spoke to Damian Holt this way. Not business partners, not women, no one. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. "You haven't done anything wrong," he said at last. His voice quieter now, almost rough. "Then why?" she pressed. His eyes darkened, stormy with a conflict he didn't want to name. "Because you make me feel things I can't afford to feel." Elena blinked, her breath catching. "I don't understand." "You wouldn't," Damian murmured almost to himself. He stood abruptly, his tall frame towering over her. "Leave the food. That's all." Her heart squeezed painfully, but she nodded, setting her jaw as she turned to leave. Yet before she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Elena," she turned back. His grey eyes locked onto hers, unguarded for once, vulnerable. "I haven't felt anything for years, nothing. And then you—" He trailed off, his throat working as though the words themselves were dangerous. "You confuse me." Elena's breath trembled. For the first time, she saw not the cold billionaire everyone feared, but a man, lonely, conflicted, aching for something he didn't understand. The following days carried an odd tension between them. Damian tried to resume his routine, but every time Elena entered a room, his chest tightened, his blood rushed hot, and he had to look away before the flood of emotions overwhelmed him. Elena, for her part, kept her distance, but inside she was a storm. She replayed his words over and over. "You make me feel things I can't afford to feel." What did that even mean? One night, unable to sleep, she sat at the kitchen counter, staring at her hands. The mansion was silent, the staff long gone to their quarters. She told herself not to think about him, not to let her heart wander where it shouldn't. He was her employer, a billionaire from another world entirely. She was a maid, struggling to keep her family afloat. But when Damian entered the kitchen suddenly, her heart leapt anyway. He paused in the doorway, his eyes finding her in the dim light. "Why are you awake?" Elena forced a small smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make tea." He stepped inside slowly, his gaze never leaving her. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. She brewed 2 cups and slid one across the counter to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending a spark up her arm that made her shiver. They drank in silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the space. Finally, Damian broke it. "You think I'm cruel, don't you?" Elena blinked at him, startled. "I think you're guarded." His lips curved in something between a smirk and a grimace. "That's a polite way of saying cold." She held his gaze, her voice steady. "I think you're a man who's forgotten what it means to feel alive." The word struck him like a blow. His hand tightened on the cup, his eyes burning into hers. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink until there was nothing but the two of them, the air thick with something neither dared name. Damian couldn't take it anymore. He pushed back from the counter abruptly, his chest heaving. The desire coursing through him was fierce, wild, something he hadn't known in over a decade. It scared him more than he wanted to admit. He turned toward the door, muttering, "I can't—" But Elena's voice stopped him. "What are you afraid of, Damian?" He froze, his back to her. The sound of his name on her lips, soft, questioning, sent a shiver down his spine. Slowly he turned back, his eyes blazing with something raw. "I'm afraid of losing control," he confessed hoarsely, "of wanting something I shouldn't want." Elena's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak. She only looked at him, her dark eyes wide, her lips parted slightly. In that charged silence, the distance between them felt like an unbearable weight. Damian took a step toward her, then another until he stood just a breath away. His hand lifted as though to touch her cheek, but stopped inches from her skin, trembling. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice ragged, his breath mingling with hers. "And I will." But Elena couldn't. Her body betrayed her, frozen in the magnetic pull of his presence. Damian's lips hovered a fraction from hers, the tension unbearable. His eyes searched hers desperately, silently pleading for permission. And then, the sound of a door opening down the hall shattered the moment. Damian stepped back abruptly, his jaw tight, his hands fisting at his sides. Without another word, he left the kitchen, leaving Elena trembling in the silence, her heart aching with the kiss that almost happened. The mansion seemed quieter than ever in the days after that almost kiss. Elena worked with her usual grace, meals prepared on time. Counters spotless, ingredients carefully labeled and stored. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Yet inside, her chest carried a heaviness she couldn't shake. Every time she walked through the vast halls, she felt the weight of his absence pressing on her. Damian had withdrawn completely. He no longer lingered near the kitchen or paused to make brief remarks about her meals. He didn't come to breakfast, didn't cross her path during the day. It was as if he had built walls thicker than before. And Elena, though she told herself she shouldn't care, felt every brick of that wall like a wound. On the fourth evening, Elena stood at the long dining table laying out silverware. Her movements were precise, her expression calm, but inside her frustration boiled. She wasn't a woman to chase affection. She had endured hardships that taught her the value of dignity, student loans drowning her, her mother's medical treatments draining her every paycheck. She didn't have the luxury of pining over a man, especially not her billionaire employer, yet his avoidance cut deeper than she cared to admit. He had come to her home, apologized, looked at her with eyes full of something raw, something real, and now, nothing, silence. The doors swung open, and there he was at last, Damian Holt, towering in a black suit, tie undone as if he had yanked it loose on the way in. His expression was tired, but his eyes sharpened the moment they fell on her. Elena straightened, refusing to look away. "Dinner is ready, sir," she said, her voice calm but firm. He gave a curt nod, about to move past her. "Why are you avoiding me?" she demanded suddenly, the words sharper than she intended. Damian froze mid-step. Slowly he turned, his grey eyes narrowing. "I'm not avoiding you, you are." She crossed her arms, her heart pounding. But she stood her ground. "You haven't looked at me for days. You don't eat when I serve you. You can barely stand in the same room. If I've done something wrong, tell me. But don't. Don't act like I don't exist." The air between them tightened. For a long moment, Damian said nothing, his jaw locked, his fists clenched at his sides. Then with a sharp exhale, he spoke. "You've done nothing wrong." His voice was low, almost rough. "You're the only thing in this house that isn't wrong." Elena blinked, stunned. Damian took a step closer, the storm in his eyes unraveling. "I've spent years in this emptiness. Parties, women, work, it's all been meaningless. I thought I was broken. I thought I couldn't feel anymore. Then you came here, cooking meals like they were art, walking these halls as if you belong, crying behind doors but still standing tall. And suddenly I feel everything." Her throat tightened. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a man unraveling. "Do you understand what that does to me? I don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to handle you." Elena's hands trembled slightly, but she lifted her chin. "You think you're the only one who doesn't know how to handle this?" Her voice cracked with honesty. "I took this job because I needed the money. My mother is sick. My debts are crushing me. I don't have time to be distracted." Her eyes stung, but she pressed on. "And yet every time you walk into a room, my heart forgets it's supposed to be practical. I hate it. I hate that you can hurt me just by ignoring me." Damian's breath hitched, his eyes softening as though her words carved him open. "Elena," she shook her head, wiping a tear before it could fall. "You say you feel alive because of me. But what am I supposed to do with that? I can't afford to get pulled into your world. I can't afford to lose myself in something that may not even be real. Her voice cracked at the end, betraying the depth of her fear. Damian stepped closer until he was just inches from her. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek but not touching, as if asking permission. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "It is real," he said. "For the first time in years, this is the only thing that feels real." Elena's breath caught, her pulse racing. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, "but I can't stay away from you either. You've woken something in me I thought was dead, and it scares the hell out of me." Her tears slipped free this time. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but she couldn't stop. Damian's hand finally closed the distance, brushing her cheek with the back of his fingers. The gentleness in the touch unraveled her completely. She leaned into it just slightly, unable to resist. "Elena," he murmured, his gaze locked on hers, searching, pleading. "Tell me I'm not alone in this." Her lips trembled. "You're not." That was all it took. Damian's restraint snapped, and he closed the distance, capturing her lips with his. The kiss was not rushed but desperate, like a man who had been starving for years and had finally tasted life. Elena's hands, trembling, found his chest, then his shoulders, clinging as if she might fall. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him, and for the first time, Damian felt the heat of desire flood his body, raw and undeniable. The world outside ceased to exist. No wealth, no titles, no burdens. Just two souls colliding in a kiss that spoke of pain, longing, and hope all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Damian pressed his forehead to hers, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "I don't know where this goes," he admitted softly. "But I know I can't go back to the man I was before you." Elena closed her eyes, her tears mingling with a shaky smile. "Then don't." The days that followed carried a shift so profound even the staff noticed it. Damian Holt, the cold billionaire, no longer barked orders or scowled through meetings. He smiled more, small, fleeting, but real. He stopped making impossible demands at odd hours. His presence in the mansion softened, as though the walls themselves had lightened. Mark, his assistant, nearly dropped his tablet the first time he saw Damian chuckle at something Elena said in passing. Elena, too, felt the change. She still worked diligently, but now there were moments, his hand brushing hers as she passed him a plate, his eyes lingering on her across the table, a quiet word of thanks that carried more weight than gold. Every glance, every touch, was a silent promise that something deeper was unfolding. One evening, Damian asked Elena to walk with him through the vast garden behind the mansion. The night air was cool, scented with roses and freshly cut grass. For once he wasn't in a suit, but in a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hands tucked in his pockets like any other man. They walked in silence at first, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. Finally, Damian stopped beneath a canopy of twinkling lights strung across the trees. He turned to her, his eyes glowing with something she had never seen in him before, tenderness. "For years," he began quietly, "I thought I was cursed to live without feeling. I buried myself in money and work, because it was easier than admitting how empty I was. But you—" He shook his head almost in disbelief. "You've made me want things I never thought I could have. A home, a family, a life that means something." Elena's throat tightened, her heart aching at the raw truth in his voice. He took her hands gently, his thumb brushing over her skin. "For the first time in years, Elena, I feel alive because of you." Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes. She squeezed his hands back, her voice trembling as she whispered, "And for the first time, I don't feel alone." In that moment, beneath the twinkling lights, their love was no longer just an awakening, it was a promise. The weeks that followed their first kiss changed everything inside the Holt mansion. Where there had once been cold silence, warmth slowly seeped through. Damian no longer shut himself in his office for endless hours. He started taking breakfast at the table, where Elena served him with her quiet grace, and sometimes, when no one else was looking, he would reach across and brush her fingers, just to remind himself she was real. The staff whispered in corners, their shock impossible to hide. The billionaire who had terrified them with his icy detachment was suddenly softer, lighter. He laughed, actually laughed, when Elena teased him about being too serious. He even allowed the gardener to suggest redesigning part of the estate, something he'd never cared about before. But it wasn't just the staff who noticed. Damian himself felt like a man reborn. Late one evening, Damian stood before the mirror in his study, staring at the reflection of a man he hardly recognized. His jaw was still sharp, his gray eyes still piercing, but there was a softness in them now, a light that had been missing for so long. He thought of Elena, her radiant dark skin glowing in the morning light, her laughter echoing in the kitchen, her quiet strength in the face of hardship. She had cracked open something in him he thought was buried forever, and now he couldn't imagine life without her. But there was still a part of him that feared. She came from a world far different from his. What if she thought he was just a temporary escape? What if she didn't believe he could truly love her? The thought haunted him, but it also gave him resolve. He wouldn't just tell her. He would prove it. Unbeknownst to Elena, Damian had started making quiet arrangements. Through Mark, he paid off the remainder of her student loans. He contacted the hospital handling her mother's care and settled the outstanding bills. He ensured her family's future was secure, not as a savior, but as a man who wanted to lighten the weight she carried every day. When Mark raised an eyebrow at the expenses, Damian simply said, "Don't tell her. Not yet. She'll think it's pity." It's not. It's love. Mark had never heard him use that word before. Love. The cold billionaire was gone. Elena, however, wrestled with her own doubts. She loved him, though the thought scared her. She could feel it in every glance, every brush of his hand, every moment when his grey eyes softened only for her. But part of her whispered warnings in the quiet of the night. What if this is temporary? What if I'm just another fleeting distraction in his wealthy world? What if tomorrow he changes his mind? Still, when she looked at him, really looked, she knew. This wasn't a game to Damian. This was real. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Damian found her in the garden. She was tending to the flowers, her curls pulled back, her skin glowing in the fading light. "Elena," he called softly. She looked up, and the way her lips curved into a smile nearly brought him to his knees. He walked toward her, his steps sure, his heart pounding harder than any boardroom battle had ever made it. When he stopped before her, his voice trembled just slightly. "I need you to know something," he said. She tilted her head, curiosity in her eyes. "I've lived my whole life surrounded by everything money can buy," he continued. "Cars, parties, houses, women who only wanted the Holt name. But none of it ever touched me. None of it made me feel alive. Until you." Her eyes shimmered, but she stayed silent, listening. "You've given me something I didn't think I was capable of anymore. Desire, hope, love." His voice cracked on the last word, but he pressed on. "And I don't want to spend another day pretending I can live without you." Before she could speak, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Elena Morris," Damian said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you be my home, my family, my forever?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes, oh God, yes." Damian slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple but elegant band, not flashy, just meaningful. Then he stood and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with the fierce tenderness of a man who had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Their wedding wasn't the extravagant gala the world expected of a billionaire. Elena insisted on something different, something real. It was held in the garden of the mansion, beneath a canopy of white roses and soft lights. The staff attended, not as servants but as witnesses who had watched their love unfold. Elena's family came, her mother radiant in a wheelchair, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. Elena wore a simple ivory gown that hugged her curves beautifully, her curls cascading down her shoulders. Damian stood at the altar in a tailored suit, his eyes never leaving her. When she reached him, he took her hands, his thumb brushing over her skin, as though anchoring himself in her presence. The vows they exchanged weren't rehearsed or ornate. They were raw, heartfelt. "I once thought my life was nothing but work and money," Damian said, his voice carrying across the garden. "But you've shown me that wealth means nothing without love. You've given me back my heart, Elena, and I promise you, I'll spend every day proving I deserve yours." Elena's tears fell freely as she spoke. "I never thought love was meant for me. I thought my struggles, my scars, my burdens made me unworthy. But you saw me when I was just a maid in your house, and you didn't turn away. You chose me. And I promise I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." The guests sniffled and dabbed at their eyes as the officiant pronounced them, husband and wife, When Damian kissed Elena, this time as his wife, the garden erupted in cheers. But for the two of them, the world fell away. It was only them, bound by love that had defied loneliness, fear, and walls built too high. That night, long after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Damian sat on the edge of the bed, watching Elena slip off her shoes with a laugh. She looked up at him, her radiant skin glowing in the soft lamplight, and he felt a surge of gratitude so fierce it almost hurt. He reached for her hand, pulling her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her as he whispered into her hair. "I had all the money in the world, Elena, but I was empty. You made me rich in the only way that matters." She smiled against his chest, her tears dampening his shirt. "And you made me believe in love again." They kissed deeply, passionately, allowing months of longing and restrained desire to flow freely. For the first time, they connected completely, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. The night brought intimacy deeper than either had anticipated. They remained wrapped in each other. As the night carried them into a future neither had dared dream of, a future built not on wealth or status, but on love, the kind that heals, transforms, and lasts forever. A heartfelt thank you to all my amazing viewers. Your love and support for this story mean more than words can express. Every like, comment, and share keeps this channel alive and inspires me to keep bringing you emotional and romantic tales that touch the heart. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. I love reading your thoughts, they make all the difference. With all my appreciation, Vintage Mike Tales.